Welcome back to the Sports Business Leaders Podcast. My name is Justin Titchenell, and on today's episode, we're featuring Jess Brodsky, the Chief Commercial Officer of PlayerData. PlayerData is a GPS performance tracking platform helping teams turn athlete data into real-time, actionable insights with world-class performance tracking technology. PlayerData supports over 60,000 athletes and 2,500 clubs across all levels from high school, college, and professional levels. Jess has a unique skill set where she brings an engineer's mind, a strategist's vision, and a people-first approach to building accessible tools that empower both coaches and athletes alike. So again, welcome to the show, Jess.
It sounds really good when you say it that way, Justin. Sometimes you gotta step back and remember that you're building something cool.
You really are. You started your career, Jess, as an engineer, and then you now lead commercial strategy for one of the fastest growing performance tech platforms in sports with PlayerData. So what originally drew you to sports and how did that journey lead you specifically to PlayerData?
Yeah, sports is really just a happy accident, to be honest. I am an athlete by trade, and I do love sports. I'm a massive fan. I'm an Eagles fan. Go Birds. Um, but when I was younger in high school, I grew up, not with a ton of resources and from a family that, was a little bit we were basically the least well off family in a very well off place. And what I learned early is I had a ton of mentors that had done really well, and they all had really tangible skills. And so when I went to college, I kind of looked around and I realized to get a tangible skill coming out of college, I could be in finance, and it's really financial modeling, and that could take me the investment banking route and maybe do some real estate investing. I mean, the opportunities are endless when you learn about how to handle money and how to project money. Or I could do engineering, which was another tangible skill. Um, what I kind of realized about engineering was if I did finance, it would kind of close the door to all the engineering roles. But if I did the engineering roles, I could always go back the finance route. Um, so I just decided to be an engineer, knowing I probably would never practice as a traditional engineer sitting in a lab building things, but really for the skill set and the doors that it opened. Um, Fast forward a couple of years, I kind of have always been that way with my career where I'm very much a chess player of here's a list of skills I need to go get. I need to learn to manage people. So I went to Israel. I played on the Israeli national team. And for the nonprofit, when I was 22 years old, 23 years old, I managed all of the athletes and people that worked for it at one point. So I got to manage a lot of people really quickly. It's a great skill to get. I worked in big corporate atmospheres while I learned how to do kind of the politics of corporate environments and sales. Um, and I was able to get a lot of experiences really quick and had really good mentors. Then I went to get my MBA, and after that went to Comcast into their RLP program, which is really where I kind of brought all my skills together. Had two unbelievable leaders there that I worked for, and Emily Waldorf and Andrew Olson, and they kind of taught me what it was to be a leader and how to, Andrew had built his business and sold it to Comcast at some point, what entrepreneurship was, how to do it. And in business school, I had a mentor named Ellen Weber, who's pretty prominent in the Philadelphia early stage startup scene. So I've kind of had all the pieces. Um, did really well at Comcast and realized that everybody had kind of built a business or done something from scratch. And somebody kind of came to me with the PlayerData opportunity, and it was a really smart team that just needed to figure out their commercialization strategy, growing really fast, doubling every year, really smart product minds. And I just feel like it was an unbelievable company on a rocket ship, and I knew my skills could help. So it kind of just sports came to me,
Yeah.
which is a weird thing when you're an athlete your whole life. I feel like it just follows you around.
It really does, and that's so interesting, Jess, just hearing about all of your skills have accumulated from, your experience at Comcast, and then I didn't know about you playing on the Israeli national team, so that's really cool. Going into player data obviously allows teams to access a lot of those game-ready, like, insights really quick, which is seems to be one of your differentiating factors, including, like, metrics like speed, distance, workload. Especially on the sidelines and coming from my background as a football player, I know how important all that data can be for a coach or even for an athlete.
Yeah.
So, what makes player data so fast and easy to use compared to some of the other platforms out there?
Yeah, I think it's really about how player data came to be and the way we look at the market. So a lot of companies come into sports tech and they assume that what happens in the top leagues, um, the 99% of athletes that play below the Premier League or the NFL or the NBA, they want the same exact products. They need the same exact things. They just need a little less features, or it needs to be cheaper, more affordable. And so they often build these amazing elite, I would say, like Porsche level products. And then they take stuff out and make almost like a bike for youth sports. And, it's progressively gets more and more features as you move up, and they just make it less and less um, expensive, and there's less support. And what we looked at player data is we flipped that model on its head. So we said, we actually don't believe that the things that are problems in the way that the top operates with their, often 12 sports scientists, a ton of athletic training support that these athletes get, that's just inherently different than what a youth athlete or a club athlete or a high school athlete has access to. And they're just different problems. They speak different languages. They understand different things about their bodies and sport. And we just built for that first. So we said, okay, we're going to go to the folks, the 99% of athletes in the world, the 99% of coaches, the 99% of organizations. We're going to go find what their problems are, build for them first, and kind of take a bottom up approach versus going top down. And that's very uncommon in performance technology. Um, and it worked for us. And a lot of that has to do with how we built the team and how we think about internally what our culture is. But it really was about, we just flipped the model. We built for kind of the average athlete first, and then have grown into the more elite spaces.
Yeah, I've never heard that, Jess, just talking about having that model flipped. And you're 100% right. And even from my experience as a college football player, when I built my platform, Coach Tools, you're right. It's very you have to figure out what are the core problems of the audience that you're serving, because just to your point, a college football player is very different than a middle school or even a high school football player. They're kids that are, 15, 16, 17 years old versus grown men that are 20, 21, 22 years old. Just to give that example in football. So that it's definitely it makes a lot of sense that player data has experienced a lot of the success so far, just given how you guys are thinking about it. And, it seems like a lot of your team has also experienced a lot of the pain points that, the common athlete would experience. So that's also great. And that's another telltale sign of a successful startup. And then going another step further, talking about how to make that data digestible to the everyday athlete. So, a lot of GPS platforms or even sports tech data, I want to say, overwhelm users with dashboards and a lot of data that doesn't necessarily always make sense. And with player data, it seems to, like you were saying, focus on some more clarity, some data that actually makes sense, that can move the needle for the everyday athlete. So how do you balance depth with simplicity, especially for some of those, I guess, earlier stage athletes?
Yeah. This has a lot to do with how we hire and how we build our culture at Player Data. A lot of people have different ideas of how you build a startup. There are some startups that are really successful because, the founder experiences that problem every single day and they're in it. Um, there are a lot of people who will only hire folks that, use their product or are in their target market because they think that that gives them an advantage. Something we've done differently is actually, besides our sales folks, which is a small portion of our business, most people at Player Data are not athletes. They're not coaches. They're not even sports fans. We're pretty famous for, we'll send folks out to visit customers, and some of our engineers will be like reading books in the stands. Like we don't even take them anymore because. And what's interesting about that is we have kind of a rule here where it's no assumptions. Like we make no assumptions. which what it does is it gives us no bias. Immediately when you become a tech sports founder and you're out, even if you're a coach and you thought you were a coach and you decide to start a company, you now immediately have bias because you're probably more tech savvy than the majority of coaches, youth coaches out there. You already know more or have asked more questions of other people, so you have some bias behind you. So what it forces us to do is really listen to our customers. And I'm not saying our employees don't use our product, they do, but how they use it is they basically just go watch other people use it. And that gives you a totally blank slate every time you're going into making a new feature or creating a new way of visualizing data because if our internal team can understand it and think they can get use from it and they're not a coach and they don't have any technical background and they're not a sports scientist, well then anyone that has any sort of experience at all will definitely be able to use it. And it forces us to really listen and ask different questions. And I think that culture of no assumptions and kind of keeping the team clean and really, I mean, when I say we rely on our clients, like we spend a ton of time with our customers. Our entire investor network is all most of them use our product in some way. Um, so we've surrounded ourselves with people who are experts or users in the different areas and the different spaces, and that's how we make things digestible because we just continue to not be biased and continue to not let I had a session today. It would be so helpful if I did XYZ. That's one person. Every single coach, every single level, every single sport is different. And there's just so many different characters in this space to really span the whole thing. You can't there's no way that we can find someone that represents everyone unless we had, 700 employees, which doesn't really make sense for us.
I love that mindset and just how you talked about having everybody's a blank slate. Just that reminds me of a book that I recently read that if any of the listeners want to check it out, it's a really good book for validating ideas. It's called The Mom Test.
Oh,
And
cool.
it talks about validating your ideas, and the whole premise around it is that your mom, if you ask your mom if your business is a good idea, she's going to lie to you and tell you it's a good idea no matter what. So it's
Yeah.
all about asking the right questions and really uncovering the truths. And it seems like from what you were saying, how everybody within player data, at least a lot of people are blank slates, and they don't have those internal biases from using a platform or being a coach in the past. Um, so I think that's really important, and it just reminded me of that specific book. So that's all great.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that with our research. Like, we'll take what a problem a coach wants to solve, but if, your kids at home can't use it and they can't explain to you what it's trying to do, we won't launch it kind of thing. That's our ultimate goal of where to get with our design, and we slowly take steps towards that.
And that's a great way to get started. And then once you have something that works, like you guys have figured out how to scale it. And as I brought up earlier, Player Data now supports over 50,000 athletes or 60,000 athletes. From the youth level to elite clubs, professional teams. So the way teams, as we've said throughout the show here, the way teams are using data is shifting. Now, from your lens as a principal at Player Data, what trends are you seeing in how teams are using performance data today? And where do you see this whole sports tech slash player performance data industry heading in the future?
Yeah, I think sports in general, it's really different by country, and we support, I think, 14 countries now, um, and a lot of different players. What I if we focus specifically on the US for a second, and then we'll kind of zoom out and go to performance technology in general. I think the US youth sports ecosystem has a lot to figure out right now. Um, and we've kind of built this ecosystem based on recruiting and how you get to the next level and the next level and the next level, but very few athletes actually make it to the next level and the next level. And with NIL and some of the roster shifts, it's going to be even less athletes outside of the mainstream revenue driving sports. Um, and we've gotten away from a lot of what youth sports has taught people, which if you look at pretty much CEOs, executives at companies, almost all of them in some way played a team sport because there's so much to learn from it beyond just getting to be an NIL athlete on the roster and making millions of dollars. And so I think there's a lot to figure out in youth sports around how we get back to that there's multiple paths for success for an athlete in that pipeline. Separate from the performance piece, I think we're in like an era right now of what I call like feature entrepreneurship. Um, and if you look at what that means is there's just so much sports tech out there right now. And everybody is like, oh my God, I have this problem. And instead of actually going to look to see if there's a solution to fix it, they're like, I'm going to build my own thing. And what happens is we get a lot of these small, almost feature driven products instead of platforms that clubs and coaches are being forced are using. So they're using, everybody's using a video platform, everybody's using a video exchange platform. Huddle has done a really good job trying to consolidate some of that stuff. Everybody's using a GPS platform in the NCAA. I think PlayerData is starting to push really hard for people to use it in high school. Everybody's also using, some video analysis tool, some recruiting tool, some system for scheduling. But if you actually look at the core customer that we're all going after, which is, the coach and the club directors, that doesn't really fit the core path of their day, right? They're busy, they're managing parents. Some of them, a lot of them have full-time jobs. This is a part-time job for them. And so the time it takes to just manage, even if they're all super easy to use, just manage those platform, those things doesn't really work. So I think what this moves towards eventually is some sort of consolidated place that actually works in a coach's natural path. And I think and that's on us too at PlayerData. I think we all have a lot to figure out with what is that interface? How do we all provide enough value together and work well together in a space to really give coaches maybe two or three things that they have to manage that really save them time instead of add time on, which I think right now a lot of sports technology is trying to save time, but is just adding things to the plate. Does that make
Right.
sense?
It really does. And also from my lens too, coming from a sports tech background with my former startup coach tools, you hit the nail on the head. From my perspective, I think what has kind of happened is sports tech is still a relatively new industry. And
Yep.
so you have all these new companies and products popping up, and it's very hard to as a coach figure out what's actually going to move the needle. And you're right, it just adds time to their workload.
The coach player relationship just can't be virtualized. I think that ruins a lot of what youth sport is. I think at the elite levels, sports performance technology is really important. It can drive, and it's important in the youth levels too, in terms of injury prevention, and it can really enhance a player. But what we also need to do is make sure we're leaving time for the coach to show up for in-person sport, because that's what it is, right? It's a relationship. It's another mentor outside of your house. It's a person to look up to ask questions that's not, your parents or your caretaker, depending on where you are in the space. So a lot of what we focus on at PlayerData now is how do we just let players get all the value from the tech. We want them to make sure they're not getting injured. We want them to have the best tools if they want to get to the next level. We want them to be able to leverage GPS technology. But how do we find that in the natural path where we're still preserving the coach player relationship? And it's a really interesting design conundrum that companies have to figure out.
Yeah. And this kind of reminds me of another instance. We just recorded a podcast earlier with another founder, Jack Adler from Out to Win, and his so he started off as a marketing agency for athletes where he didn't build any tech. He just started off by making relationships. And I think relationships are at the core of a lot of these businesses, and that's what people and founders have to, realize. So, it's really good to hear you say that, Jess.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard place to be, right? You're trying to give people access to more while also helping them do less. It's a weird thing. And I think right now we just haven't mastered that as a sports technology community. We'll get there.
Yep. Yeah, we
There's
will.
a lot of things that are going to help in the horizons, but we probably spend every day at PlayerData talking about how to save people time and give them value.
Thanks again for sharing all this, Jess. Any last words you'd want to share with the audience today?
No, I mean, thank you so much for having me. And also the events that you guys have been attending all over the country have been incredible. We've met, I've met some really interesting people, which has been awesome as a sports technology person in Philly. We moved to Philly with our headquarters here in University City about 8 months ago and haven't really found a space in the sports technology scene. So we've really been enjoying our time, kind of getting to know the members of SBL. And I'd say for any, entrepreneur in the space looking to be in youth sports, just continue to make sure that preserve the coach relationship and save time and listen to your customers.
There you go. Awesome, Jess. Thanks again, and best of luck moving forward.
Thanks, Justin. I appreciate it.